What's up, everybody? Ron Placone here. Screenings for my film are happening. My movie Left at Wall is finished, and it's coming out this year. We're getting it out there. February 22nd, you can see it in Tucson, Arizona, having a screening in Tucson. February 29th, Omaha, Nebraska. March 20th, Washington, D.C., and that's a free screening, by the way. March 22nd, there's going to be a show and screening. In other words, I'm going to be there. That's in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. March 22nd, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, comedy show and a screening. April 14th, Los Angeles, California, show and a screening. We'll be announcing the full lineup on that soon, but there's going to be a show and a screening of the film at Flappers Comedy Club in Burbank. Get your tickets now, ronplacone.com for tickets and more information on all those events. Episode 18, Chris Fafalios. Chris Fafalios is a musician, podcaster, producer, and more. Growing up, I followed Chris's band, Punchline. They're an excellent pop-punk band. They've toured all over the world, and they're still going strong to this day. When I went away to college, I wasn't able to keep up with the Pittsburgh music scene as much. Years later, I got into Chris Demakes, a podcast by Chris Demakes, who is the lead singer of Less Than Jake. I found out that Chris Fafalios produces that podcast. We talk about it, get a pretty cool origin story. We also dive into all of Chris's other projects, and of course, we talk music. Please welcome to the show, Chris Fafalios. So, Chris Fafalios, good to see you, man.
You too, Ron. How you been?
I've been good. It's been, I was thinking about this shortly before we signed on. I think it has been approximately 20 years since my last Punchline show.
Where would that have been?
It was Club Laga.
Club Laga. Very nice. Very
Club
nice.
Laga was, that's how far back it goes. And I'm pretty sure I was a senior in high school. So awesome. It's crazy. But so the first thing I want to talk to you about, I've thought about this. You have been entertaining me for literally more than half my life. But
that's awesome. Thanks.
Oh yeah, well, thank you. But in different variation, different capacities as we've both grown up. It started I just liked your band and still like your band, but then it's you got into this podcasting space and I like the podcast you're a part of. So it's sort of as I grew up and got into different things, there was always something Chris Fafalios centric that I enjoyed.
I just got to be out there, man. I gotta, I gotta make my voice heard out there for better or worse. My voice is out there in the world one way or another. You said I've been entertaining you. I just questioned myself. I don't think I've ever thought of myself as an entertainer, but I guess maybe I could be considered an entertainer. I never thought about that. When I think of an entertainer, for some reason, the first person that comes to mind, I don't know why, is Janet Jackson. I think of Janet Jackson. She's a true entertainer, and I don't know if I could put myself in the same ballpark as Janet Jackson, but when you said that, it made me think that. So thanks,
that's
Ron.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Maybe it was just a weird choice of word.
No, I like it.
I felt like creating content that I found valuable would have been way longer.
Nice. Well, I appreciate that.
Well, so talk a little bit about your creative evolution then. I mean, obviously you're still doing music. It's not like you left that, but you've done all these other things. You make pins. Talk a little bit about just the the whole creative quilt of Chris Fafalios.
I think everything that I have done for the past few decades creatively has stemmed one way or another from the fact that I play in the band Punchline. I think that everything is just along the way. I mean, look, podcasting, for example, I found out what a podcast was in 2005 or 6 or something. And I'm like, oh, I want to do that. And so we started making Punchline podcasts in the van. Obviously, the audio quality was less than perfect and whatever. But from there, I'm like, oh, I like doing this. So that was because of Punchline. I started doing that. Video editing, anything like that. It was because I wanted to make video stuff for Punchline. Anything that I've done was the spark came from my band. So I think that just led to all these other projects. And then, along the way, if I got half good at something, then maybe I would do that thing for somebody else. Somebody else would hire me to do it, or I would voluntarily do it for someone I liked or something. So I think that it's like with anything, man, if you start doing something and you stick to it, all these other doors are going to open. And I think that's how I got here, decades later, and do a bunch of different things and try to, balance a lot of different things at the same time.
That's really awesome, actually, because and I feel like that's sort of a universal story, because as you were saying that, I kind of thought of like, oh, everything I've done in the past like decade and a half has all stemmed because one day I started doing stand-up.
Right.
Like everything else, like it all started with me doing stand-up, and it just kept morphing and morphing from there.
Right. And podcasting, dude, I listen to a lot. I hear a lot of stand-up comedians talk about it. It's like the thing you do, right? Like it's, if you're a stand-up comedian and you don't have a podcast, what are you doing?
Yeah.
With musicians too, kind of almost, it's same old story.
It's getting to that point, which I do enjoy, because I like, I listen as a listener. I listen to more music podcasts than comedy podcasts.
Well, that's funny you say that, because I think it's whatever you do, you want to hear about other things. I listen, as a person who plays music, I listen to a lot of sports and comedy and, anything else, because I'm talking and listening to people talk about music so much already that I want to hear about some other things,
Yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to run this by you, and we're going to talk more about the audio documentary series that y'all made about the band, which I enjoyed a lot, by the way. Thanks. But while I was listening to that, I kind of thought, because I was kind of near all this stuff from like, I guess, 99-ish up until I left for college, basically. And I feel like that generation was kind of the last touring generation in like the Black Flag sense, where there was, you want to go to this town and play this venue because they sort of have a built-in audience and there's a little bit of scene cred. I feel like that was still around when you guys really started hitting the road, but I don't know if it's around anymore, or maybe I'm just older. But what's your take on that?
That's a really good question, because there were a lot of every VFW, every fire hall, every Elks Lodge in the country, I swear we played at them. And we even, in our hometown, now I'm talking hometown. Pittsburgh, of course, we call it our hometown, but we're from the Mon Valley, which is even a smaller place. But there was a place called the Charleroi VFW, which we would set up our own shows there. And then touring bands that went on, a lot of bands that went on to become way bigger bands, would, if it was a Tuesday night and you're on tour, you're going to play at the Charleroi VFW. If you're the All-American Rejects on a Tuesday night, you're going to play at the Charleroi VFW. You know what I mean? And there were those places all over the country. And, at this point, in my experience, when Punchline goes out and plays, we're going to play like at least a decent venue. We're kind of, we haven't played a little place like that in a pretty long time. Not that I wouldn't. It's just, it might be what you're saying. It might not be as prevalent. And if it is, I don't know about it as much. It seemed like Pennsylvania alone, you used to be able to go to places like, around Pittsburgh, of course, you go to Erie, Edinburgh area, Altoona, Johnstown, St. Mary's. There was always kids putting on a show. By kids, I mean someone from between the age of like 15 and 20 putting on shows. Like you said, there was a built-in audience because it was the thing to do in that place, regardless of who the artists were. And I'm sure you had a wide variety of like the worst band you ever heard to some amazing band was playing there, maybe on the same bill sometimes. But yeah, I think you might be right. I don't know if it exists as much anymore. And if it doesn't, that's a shame. I hope that it still exists, and I just don't know about it as much.
It's funny you mentioned that All American Reject show because I was at that show.
Nice.
I still remember they were on TRL like a week and a half
Right.
later.
Dude.
And I remember seeing that. And I was like, I saw those guys at a fire hall.
Yeah.
And like 5 people knew who they were. Like,
that was the era too, man, where we would see it. Like you said, I mean, it was fast for some bands that would catch on. We were on tours with bands that would catch on, and we'd see night by night an increase in the crowd size. Like if it happened fast. And, it was because, if you got on TRL or something, of course, but it was because of the internet. It was because that was file sharing, that was LimeWire and Napster and things were spreading like wildfire. People were passing stuff around. So you saw stuff really start to explode like in real time around that time. So I don't know. It's a pretty exciting time to think about all the advances that happened in like a few short years when you look back on it.
No, it is incredible because it's like those opportunities were there, but also the internet wasn't quite what it is today as far as how much stuff is just there. So stuff would just spread like wildfire, and you would see. And then it was like that was the time when the biz started to notice what was going on in the pop punk world, which I'm sure you could speak to this infinitely better than I can. But it was just crazy to see, even as a listener, because I mean, I still remember talking to a friend about a Warped Tour they went to, and they'd be like, there was this one really funny poppy band that I really enjoyed. They were making a bunch of jokes about their dicks. And then 3 weeks later, Blink-182's all over MTV. It's like, oh, that was the band I was talking about.
Yeah. It's at that time, especially if you could harness the power of the internet, not everyone was doing it, but I think that our experiences, we were always like pretty good. I felt like in recent years, now I'm trying to catch back up on it, but we were always like on top of stuff. Like we had a website. I mean, on the podcast, we talked about it. Like we kind of had a website before most like local punk bands would have a website, and we were ahead of the game on like YouTube and things along the way. And there were a couple things in recent years that we slacked on. TikTok, for example. We're on it now, and we post on there, a good bit now, but we weren't on the cutting edge of that. We should have been, and I want to make sure that I'm always aware of what the next, advancement in technology that people like to use is. And I felt like back then we were always, a little bit ahead of the curve. And that helped us be able to do what we did.
I think that's fair to say, man. I mean, honestly, like, and I'm not like trying to flatter you or whatever, but I think you guys really set a great example of just how to be as a band if you want to really do it. I mean, you guys, even, just being a fan of yours, you guys were always doing different fun, creative things in addition to putting out music that I enjoyed. I mean, I remember you guys, you made like a kind of Jackass style documentary. And and that was like no bands or not many bands were doing that, but you guys had one, and it was really funny. Like I remember
got us signed. That thing got
did it?
It was a big factor in us getting signed was like them watching the Rewind documentary that that we made ourselves and our friends made. And now that would be every band that's trying to do something just posting YouTubes all the time, but it was pre-YouTube, so it was like one big 45-minute YouTube of us. I mean, just trying to be funny.
I thought it was great. I mean, that whole thing where you claimed you wrote your school's theme song, and then I don't think it was someone. I think it was a friend of the band. I think it was Johnny Yetskanish, but he interviewed the one teacher and was asking about students that he didn't even teach. Like the teacher was getting annoyed with them.
Yeah, Mr. Pesos, of course.
Dude, that was so funny.
Nice. Glad you liked that, man.
I still remember that, and I watched it. I was in high school when I watched that thing, and I still remember bits and pieces of it.
Hell yeah, love that.
So let's talk a little bit more about how you really got into the podcasting world. I mean, you mentioned like the band would just kind of do stuff in the van, but how did you then go on to, start to launch some of the things you launched?
So, at first, my crash course in podcasting was, what's a podcast? And then made, not even knowing what we were doing, made, I don't know, 20 some, maybe 30 episodes. I can't even find them anymore. They were called the Chris Fafalios White Van Podcast. And it was just, when we were driving, we would just make a podcast. And what funny little note about that is that it ended because we were driving in the middle of the night and we were podcasting. And this has nothing to do with what happened. It's just like we were just having a conversation in the van and we were driving and boom, while we're driving in the middle of the podcast, an owl flew into our van, into the grill of the van. And we're like, what was that? And we pulled over and there's an owl just dead stuck into it would have happened whether we were podcasting or not, but I feel like we just went, we're good on podcasting now. It wasn't because we weren't paying attention. The thing ran right. It would have happened regardless. But that was, I guess that was like 2006, 2007 or so. And then a few years passed. Steve from my band, his brother Mike Sabosley, and I started a podcast called Men in Their 30s Only that we did for years. And it was just us talking about how we're in our prime. We're in our 30s. It was called Men in Their 30s Only, but the subtitle of it was A Podcast for Everyone. And we got the title from, I don't know why. There used to be like these Facebook groups called like Teens Only or whatever, and we used to laugh about that, so we made a podcast called Men in Their 30s Only. We did that for years. And want to know something funny about that podcast is we did it to make ourselves laugh. We'd post about it, and I didn't realize it because I had nothing to compare it to. Every episode that we put up of that was getting thousands of downloads, and I guess I didn't realize what we had. Like I said, I was like, oh, I guess that's just an average amount. But then I've seen and talked to other people who's like, dude, that's a lot of plays. And I was like, I didn't realize. Now I realize it, and so anyway, we did that for 80 or 90 episodes over the course of a few years. And, eventually my good buddy, Matt Kelly, hit me up about doing a podcast about one-hit wonders. And I was like, yeah, sure. Not thinking anything of it. Now here we are 200 episodes, close to 5 years later, 4 or 5 years later. And that's been a major thing for me that we do well with that. But then in the early months of that, Chris Demakes from the band Less Than Jake, who we got to know, from years, they took us on tour several times and, been friends of ours, hit me up because I had taught myself how to do animation and, just basic animation, but pretty decent. And he wanted to hire me to do something to advertise his songwriting. Like he would do like jingles or personalized songs. You see a lot of people do that, songwriters. And then once I finished the project, he was like picking my brain about like, what would you do to try to get the word out about, the fact that I write songs and stuff? And I said, why don't you start a podcast? And he's like, nah, like most people do. I'm sure you've heard. He's like, nah, everybody has a podcast. Why would I do that? And I said to him, well, yeah, maybe, but you could say that about being in a band. You could say, oh, everybody has a band. Everybody does this. It's what you do with it. And I said, everybody's not you. And so he called me the next day and was like, hey, I want to do a podcast. Will you help me do it? And then that was the start of that. And obviously, we've been doing that podcast for like 4 years now. And between his connections and me just cold reaching out to people and whatever and word of mouth, that Chris Demakes a podcast has really blown up and been I don't know. It's really opened a lot of doors too. Everything you do and you stick to opens 50 other doors for you, it seems like. And that's the way that is. The main thing with podcasting I found is you got to stick to it. I think I saw a stat that like I forget, it was at least 90% of podcasts last 7 episodes max, and then someone's just like over it, you know? So I think that like the stick-to-itiveness of it, and if any success I've had in podcasting, I attribute a big portion of that to just sticking to it and being like, I'm releasing an episode every week. And, you know, luckily I've surrounded myself with people who also have that dedication. That's hard sometimes too, is to find people that are dedicated with it. But yeah, I don't even remember what the original question was. Sorry for rambling for so long.
I mean, it was podcasting. So yeah, you nailed it. Right. And I completely agree with you. I even try to follow the rule, you know, like they say, when you start something new, like, yes, stick with it and don't even like focus on like the tangibles for a while. Like they recommend you don't even look at the stats for 2 years. Like, just don't even look at it. Just focus on making a great show. And then after like a year or two, go ahead and take a look, see where you're at, see how it's going. And you know, you got to think about that stuff. But, and I think that's the way to be. I really do. I mean, this is a new project for me. So,
yeah. And you know what I always tell people too, cause I do some like editing work for people and producing work on podcasts and stuff. I am a firm believer. Now, it's not the whatever. You do whatever, and sometimes you need to do something and put it out there to get it going. But I want to start more podcasts, actually. But if I do, I'm recording and editing and having 10 episodes ready to go before I even release one. So that way I can schedule them out and feel the momentum and not feel the stress or the anxiety of like, oh shit, I got to get an episode done this week. And then you get in the flow of it and you can just focus on like, what do I got to do to post about this and let people know about it but anyway, that's just me. That ain't the end all be all. I think if you start it, that's the most important step.
Absolutely. And actually, for the record, man, since you mentioned it, I pre-recorded 10 of these things before I started dropping them.
Love that. That.
I started pre-recording in, I guess it was April of 23. And it was, you know, what I've tried to do with this series is different than anything I've ever done. So like the first interview that I recorded was with a buddy of mine who has a career in the Renaissance fairs. Which that episode is dropped, but that was like a really fun episode. We just talked about how he got into that.
That's a fascinating world.
It's a very fascinating world, dude. I mean, the stuff he was telling me, and a lot of the stuff he's just told me over the years. And I was like, we got to capture this. Like, I want to do an episode with you. And then there was also like a personal component because he really helped me through a breakup. And so the episode's all about that. And then my second episode that I recorded was with Jello Biafra. And I was like, awesome. Oh, this is going to be, I was like,
that's a great second episode.
Right? Like I was like, this is how I got to do this series. This is like a perfect snapshot of what I'm trying to do. So
did you just cold hit him up or did you have a connection or what?
Greg Palast is a mutual friend of ours.
Okay.
The journalist. So Greg, I told Greg, I was like, hey, I have this new project that I want to do that. Of course, I want to have you on as well. But, you know, would you be willing to speak to Jello for me? And he put me in touch with the Alternative Tentacles people. And then, you know, Jello was down to do it.
That's awesome because, I mean, the reason I ask is because that's something I've learned a lot, too, is like, you never know who's going to say yes. You know, right? So many people that I've had as guests on podcasts, it was a cold email. I found an email address and cold hit them up. And like, next thing you know, oh my God, we got this huge guest coming on. And hey, it doesn't hurt to try, you know?
Yeah. I mean, hey, you guys have gotten some real big heavy hitters with the debate. And by the way, you know, I didn't get to mention it right when you talked about it, but man, thanks for planting that seed because that podcast is amazing.
Thanks.
And I think yourself and Chris Demakes, I mean, he is so good at picking apart a song and the questions that he asks, it's so insightful. And man, I can't believe he never had any intentions of doing a podcast. I'm really glad you pushed him to that.
He's really good at it. The way that he gets into the weeds without getting like, we both agreed. Don't go down the road of talking about gear. I mean, there's some gearheads out there that want to hear you talk about amps and pedals and stuff, but the average person does not want to hear that. I'm surprised that people do even like hearing about like some of the more music nerd stuff, but in general, I love the most when people open up about the lyrics. That's really what it's all about, right? You want to hear when people open up. We've had people in tears on the show before, where it's like it's so personal. You don't want to push them, and like that's not your intentions. But I think people like talking about it. Sometimes there's some people that think talking about music that's not what you should do. That should let the music speak for itself. But I don't know. I enjoy listening to it. If someone's willing to open up about something they wrote, I think it's awesome. And it's especially we try to go for the jugular with like the song choice, the most well-known song, because sometimes there's a surprising story behind it. So yeah, I thought it was a pretty solid idea. I'm glad people like it.
Is this, and this is just a question as a fan right now, but is it protocol to have a person on for another song too, or have you not gotten there yet?
We started bringing a couple people back. Okay. We didn't want to repeat any guests. We wanted to try to go forever without repeating a guest, but then we were like, some people we had on just have written too many good songs. So this past June of 2023, we said we're going to do a month where we're going to bring back guests we want to bring back. So we brought back John Feldman from Goldfinger to talk about Superman. We brought back Fat Mike from NoFX to talk about The Decline. We brought back Real Big Fish. We've had like 7 or 8 return guests now. We're pushing 200 episodes. So it's been a lot of different guests, but there have been 6 to 8 return guests at this point.
Okay. Well, yeah, because I mean, I loved, and I don't know if this is one of the returns, but I really loved the Matt Skiba episode. But
I'd like to bring him back.
Oh, yeah, dude. I mean, as much as I loved it, I was just like, wait a second. This isn't the only trio song we're going to get, though, is it? I have a list of a billion.
What would it be? So we did radio. What would be radio? What would be the one? What would be the next one?
The next one? Oh, man. Well, so I would actually want... And I guess maybe you might want to get like Dan or Matt, depending on the song, right? Okay, so you had Dan, and he did
Every Thug Needs a Lady.
Okay, yes, Every Thug. I did listen to that song. I would love to see Dan do Emma would be interesting in general because Matt wrote it, but Dan sang it.
Oh, okay.
Right? I think.
I don't know.
All right. Well, I think Emma in general.
I'm just trying to think of what their next biggest song is. They've had it because they're not one of those bands that's like they're a big band. They're a very popular band, but they're also not like mainstream big. So
right.
I don't know. Like I always think of like Stupid Kid as a big song from them, although maybe not.
No, I think Stupid Kid. Yeah, that's fair. Well, and then I guess like This Addiction, as far as just like more exposure, like more mainstream exposure, it might be some of that later stuff. But it's like, but for Alkaline Trio, like people that have been following them forever, which I think is a large portion of their fan base, it's like there's just this huge list of songs. Like people probably
they have, and they're a band too where it's not obvious because their songs, they're very much a lyric band, and so many of different songs resonate with different people different ways. It's not like a band where it's obvious what the hits are. And I think that's cool. Not that my band's as big as Alkaline Trio, but I feel that way when I talk to people that like my band. Is like there's not really too many. There's a couple that but it's interesting when people come up and be like, you didn't play this song. And I'm like, really? You want that song? No one's ever asked for that one before. It's interesting when you're not a super huge band that it's not always obvious. I feel like Alkaline Trio is kind of that way too.
Oh yeah. Well, with them, it's like there's so much metaphor in their lyrics, and it is so lyrics driven that I relate to it as much as I did when I was 20, but in like just a totally different way now. Like I relate to it like from a totally different angle, as you know, because there's still just that angst of just growing up and dealing with the world.
Right.
That's like kind of universal.
I was surprised because I don't know, their lyrics are so dark, and it seems like you could think that guy's like mean or something just based on the music or something. I was surprised at like what a nice guy he is. He's so nice, such a sweet guy, like one of the nicer people that, I mean, everybody's been pretty nice that we've had as guests, but I'm just saying, like, you'd expect him to be like this dark, brooding guy, but he's really not.
Yeah, no, I mean, he was one of those guys where, like, I mean, they probably don't do this anymore because they're probably too, but back in like the early aughts or whatever, he was that guy that if you waited by the tour bus, he would stop and talk to everybody.
Right.
And literally until they had to leave for the next town, he would hang out. He was just that kind of guy. Yeah,
Love that.
Is really cool.
Wouldn't you be that way if your band was popular? I would be that way.
You are that way. You guys have always been that way.
I'm saying, though, if my band was like huge, I would definitely, I mean, I guess maybe if your band's huge, you get some strange, you probably get some strange people you got to deal with. But I'm just saying, like, in general, I would want to be that. If I was Dave Grohl, I'd want to be that guy. I'd want to be out there and talk. I mean, I'm sure he would have to deal with some real craziness. But anyway, I like that is my point. I think that's cool.
Well, I think you guys, and I'm sure, you know, still are. I mean, it's been a while since I've been able to just catch a show, but I mean, yeah, you guys were always just super cool. I mean, you guys would always hang out and talk to people and, you know, remember your fans' names and stuff. And I just always thought that was really cool.
It's hard for me to imagine someone coming up to you and telling you like they like your music or they like your band and not like just, I don't know, over the top thank them and be appreciative of it. Because I mean, even if people do that to me today, hey, this is a crazy story. It was last week I was grocery shopping and this guy came up to me and went, "Hey man, I like your music." And I was like, "Oh my God, thanks." I got recognized at Greensburg Walmart. I felt like, whoa, I didn't even know what to say. I was just like, "Thank you so much, man." I wanted to like buy him a frozen pizza or something. Like you really made my day. I didn't really know what more to say. I just thanked him. But, you know, I still get a thrill out of that is my point.
No, I mean, I can relate to that some. I mean, every now and again, I'll get a tweet of somebody where they'll be like, "Oh yeah, I saw you, but I didn't want to say anything. I didn't want to bother you." And I'm like, dude, I'm not like I'm just an online comedian. Like if you would have said something, it would have made my day as much, if not more, than yours. Like it really please say something next time.
Yeah, for real, right? Hey, could you imagine if somebody like gave you a like super compliment about just anything and you were just kind of like, "Thanks," and just like moved on. Right. I don't get how you could be that way. It's funny. I think maybe who was it? Was it Larry David who was talked about how if somebody comes up and tells you they like, I think in his, I don't know, I don't want to misattribute this interview I heard. I think it was Larry David. If someone comes up and talks about how they like your show or your comedy or something, that could be the worst person in the world. You're going to like them. You know, like it doesn't matter how terrible of a person they are. If they like your music, I just like that guy. I can't help it. I like him now. And I don't know. I kind of feel that way sometimes. I think it was Larry David I saw talk about that. Yeah. It was really funny.
So I want to talk a little bit about the audio documentary that you guys made. Sure. It's a band called Punchline. I highly recommend it for anybody, especially if you're in a band. I mean, I think that is so cool. You guys really get into it. And for people who grew up with you guys, I mean, for a lot of us, that was just a really big trip down memory lane. I think my wife even listened to some of it with me because she was just kind of like, I was like, yeah, this is kind of what I like to do as a kid. Because it's like my wife, you know, grew up being into music too. And so she grew up in the Cape Cod area, Massachusetts. So she had, that sort of the scene that Massachusetts had. And that, I mean, obviously you mostly had to go to Boston for stuff, but they had like a little all ages venue. So she had that experience too. So we kind of had that in common. And so I would share that and I'd be like, yeah, this is the stuff that I grew up going to. And all these places they're talking about, I've been to a lot of the shows they're talking about. But you guys go really deep and you rehash some stuff. Not all of it is happy. No. So I mean, for the making of that, like was there sort of any pain as you guys were rehashing it, or is it all water under the bridge and everyone's cool, or a little bit of both?
It's all water under the bridge. That's the good part, is that we're all friends now. Even the everybody in the end ended up being friends who hang out all the time and play music together all the time. So there's no hard feelings at all. But yeah, going back and like talking about some of that stuff is, I don't want to say painful, but it sucks to relive some of the, I mean, we had all the standard stuff you expect a rock band to have happen to them. You had your moments where you made a decision and it might not have been the right one. You had the drugs, you had everything you expect on the journey of a band happened. And, with that, I love what you said about your wife listening to it too, because I've been able to put the word out about that podcast to I'll put some ads on the Chris Demakes podcast and just to some people that maybe weren't familiar with Punchline that have listened to it and still enjoyed it because they could relate to so much of it, whether they were in a band or they went to shows or just enjoy a story. That was one part of it. On my end, I wanted it to be like my pride and joy as far as like an editor of a podcast is like, make this thing really good. Make it like a documentary, not just, us just blabbering for hours. I wanted to make it like, like you're watching a movie in your mind or something while you're listening to it. So that's really cool that she enjoyed it as well, because, some people have said that to me, and I think that's the highest compliment. I kind of thought to a certain extent it is fan service, or whatever you want to call it, for people that already are somewhat familiar and maybe want to know more. But I like to think that it stands on its own. And we're up to, with that podcast, because there's so much that goes into it, it's kind of like however long it takes between episodes is however long it takes.
Sure. Yeah.
Because right now we're up to 2010 on it. And we do each episode's an album era. And sometimes it takes months. Sometimes it takes 6 months to do an episode because we're getting audio from so many different pieces, from so many different people. And then it's my job. I always record my audio last. So I serve as the glue. So if I need to connect what one person said with what another person said, I will talk to be that sort, to bridge that gap. And it's not easy.
Yeah, it's a documentary. I mean, it is quite literally a documentary. I mean, it's and it's really, it's really just interesting though, and especially I mean, I think for people that have grown up with you guys. I mean, for me personally, another really cool component of it is because we had a couple degrees of separation. Like one of my good friends was in a band with some of your good friends and stuff like that. So it's like I mean, it's. Yeah, Nate. I mean, and we're still friends to this day. And so, I mean, I don't get to talk to him all the time, but we usually check in, like a couple times a year.
I haven't seen him in a while. I saw him somewhere. Anyway, that's off topic, but I saw him somewhere in the past 5 years, maybe. But
that's more recent than me. I haven't seen him in a long time. Yeah. I mean, we still text, but yeah, like, so I would hear like a lot of the stuff that I later heard in that podcast. I remember hearing, like the telephone version of it elsewhere, where it's just like, oh yeah, this thing happened to Punchline in Arkansas, and then hearing the like confirmed story, and then just seeing how close the hearsay that I got was, especially because not only was it just couple degrees of separation, but also many years have passed. So I'm like relying on my memory. So it was just really fun from that standpoint too. What made you pick the bass?
Well, this is probably going to be unbelievable to you, as it probably would be to most people, but I got a bass the week that I realized what a bass was. Like, I loved music. I listened to music all the time, took piano lessons, half-assed. I wish I would have stuck with piano, but like, it's one of those things you do as a kid. Piano lessons. But never really had too much experience with the bass guitar. And then it was like, well, I want to start a band with my friends or whatever, and nobody played bass. So I was like, I went to a baseball card shop that also sold musical instruments, and there was a bass, and I bought it. And, from there, I don't know. It was somewhat natural. I kind of picked up stuff here and there as I went, but yeah, it was just kind of like there was nobody that played bass. I wanted to start a band. I knew people that played guitar. I knew people that played drums. I knew people that sang. I put sang in quotes. But the bass player is something that was needed. I don't know if bass players are as in demand now, but it was kind of like same kind of thing. I grew up playing hockey, and I was a goalie. Why was I a goalie? Because we didn't have a goalie. So I stepped into that role. It was the same sort of thing. Like, hey, we need a bassist. So I got a bass. And then the rest was history.
No, dude, that's beautiful. I mean, a buddy of mine left for tour in Australia, and he just texted me like, just checking in, saying hi, and he's like, yeah, we're going on tour in Australia, and he's the bass player. So I sent him, just as like a fun, like, hey, good luck on tour, and then along with that good luck thing, I sent him a Hard Times article, like a Hard Times headline that said bass player demoted to merch guy, or merch guy demoted to bass player.
Right. Yeah, I've heard that. Hey, sometimes those merch guys do get the promotion to the band. It's happened. I've seen it happen several times, and sometimes it will be to bass. But let's not give bass too bad of a rap here, because a good bassist, maybe you don't notice it, but a bad bassist, oh boy, you will notice a bad bassist in a band. I'll tell you that.
In a bassist, the bassist really sets the genre. I mean, if you were playing in Punchline and all of a sudden you decided to, do bass lines as if you're doing like country, you're going to completely change everything, no matter what the rest of the band does.
Right.
I mean, that's
bass players could overplay sometimes. I've seen it.
Or just not fit in. I mean, it's imagine Rancid without Matt Freeman. Imagine, and it's, I've really, I live in San Pedro, which is Mike Watt territory.
Okay.
So, that's a guy who's just all about the bass and just and he'll like kind of break it down why. And you should do his show if you never have.
No, I have not.
You should totally. I mean, dude, because he's all about the bass. And,
that's awesome.
Yeah, he has a fun show. It's called the Watt from Pedro Show. I don't listen to it all the time because it's
I'll check it out. I didn't even know about it.
It's long because I think he also does it as a radio show. So he'll legit have, and sometimes I just want to like hear the conversations. So like, I just want to hear the guests. So I'll kind of like scroll through it because it's 3 hours, but yeah, it's a cool show. But, so my last question, and I think you're going to have fun with this one. I have said to other people, cause my sister moved back to Pittsburgh a couple years ago, and, I've said this to other people, not just from what I've seen from you, but I've seen this from other people too in my life, where they're asking about like areas kind of on the up. And I'm like, one of the best kept secret right now is Greensburg. Like
Oh, I thought you were going to say Pittsburgh. Greensburg. Okay, continue.
Oh yeah, no. Within Pittsburgh, in the Pittsburgh area. Yeah.
Right.
Like in the Pittsburgh area. Like my sister and brother-in-law were looking to buy a house and stuff. They decided to move back, start a family, and all that. And I mentioned Greensburg because it seems like Greensburg is kind of a happening place now.
I like Greensburg. So when I was looking to buy a house, I looked at closer to Pittsburgh. And first of all, the houses were way more expensive. Second of all, the taxes were way higher. And I was like, maybe Greensburg. I'm going to check out Greensburg. And I'm glad I live in Greensburg. Hey, man, I'm 35 minutes away from Pittsburgh. Whatever. Right. Like, I just hop on the turnpike. Punchline practices in McKees Rocks. So I'm actually going past Pittsburgh to go to band practice, which that's a little bit annoying. But otherwise, if I need to go to Pittsburgh to do something, it's not that big of a deal. Yes, downtown Greensburg is pretty cool. We got some cool coffee shops like the White Rabbit. We got some cool places to eat. We have the Palace Theater. We have a nice venue here where I'm actually in April. I'm going to the Price is Right live there.
Nice.
So I'm hoping to get on stage there. But there's some decent shows that come to the Palace. The Goo Goo Dolls played there. Regina Spektor played there. Who did I go? Oh, I went and saw Ben Folds play there last year. Like, that's cool, right?
I bought my parents tickets to a show there. I bought them tickets. I'm a big Tall fan, and so are my folks. That's how I got it. But the ex-guitarist Martin Barr has a band now, just called the Martin Barr Band, and they played the Palace Theater. So nice. I got my folks tickets for that show. That's cool. I mean, that's a cool venue, and in the summer they have big summer concerts in the park, and it's like a nice small town, nice small city. Because I grew up like 20 minutes, I guess it would be south of here, in like the Mon Valley. That's really, there's not much there. That's like too small town. Every restaurant. Oh, you know what else we have here now? A casino. We have a casino. Oh, yeah. I mean, we really have it all. We have every restaurant you can imagine. We got a mall, a casino, venues, great local places to eat. I don't know. I'm glad I live in Greensburg. I like it here. Yeah, it's just interesting to see like the areas that kind of got a bump over the years, like having grown up in Pittsburgh and then seeing like, oh yeah, Oakmont is kind of like really cool and happening now. Yeah. And it was always like really cool scenery there, but it was sort of like, oh, they had the Oaks and then there wasn't much else, really going on. And now it's like kind of happening. And now Greensburg, I remember growing up, they used to have a CD warehouse that had shows. Do you remember that? It's still there. And the CD warehouse? This is so funny you bring this up. I was just there before Punchline played a show, like our holiday show on December 15th. And the day of, actually, that morning, we went to get breakfast. And my friend Matt Kelly, who I do One Hit Thunder with, he's the producer of One Hit Thunder. He loves the CD warehouse. Every time he comes out here, he spends $50 or $60 at the CD warehouse because to this day, he is still a collector of physical media. He loves CDs. He loves DVDs. He goes there and buys all this obscure stuff for a couple bucks a piece. And they also have vinyl there, but way more CDs and DVDs. And the place is big and it's still open and it is thriving, man. They don't have shows there anymore. I know they used to have shows there back in the day, and Matt even said to me, because he went there the day before too, but he went back to get some things he wanted to get that he didn't get. And he said that he couldn't believe how many young people were in there, like people like teenagers in there buying CDs and stuff. And I really think that the used CD store has gone the way of the dodo. And the fact that CD warehouse is still standing, I think people really like that. That's incredible. I never would have guessed in a million years that place was still open. I was just there. It's so funny. Wow. I thought you were going to say it's condos now, but wow. That's incredible. Nope. That is a victory. I was impressed when I walked in there because I haven't bought a CD in a long time. I buy some records here and there, of course, but I haven't been there. But I walked in, I'm like, I can't believe how big this place is and how many people were in there. They were having a sale. Oh, that's why we went back, because the sale, they were having like a 40% off sale the next day. So he went in there, scoped out all the things he wanted. We went there that next day, like after breakfast. Yeah. CD warehouse. Hey, it's another reason to move to Greensburg. We got a CD warehouse. Right on, man. Well, hey, thanks so much for doing this. Plug away. Yeah. Where can people go to learn more about you? I'm on all the things.
Chris Fafalios on, Instagram and TikTok and Facebook and wherever else. I'm on all the places, but hey, podcasts, a band called Punchline, look it up. One Hit Thunder, I host that one, and Chris Demakes a podcast. I produce that, and I'm on the episodes like at the end. Those are my things, and Punchline. You can go to punchlinemusic.com, and we have a bunch of tour dates coming up. We had an album called Action that came out in the year 2004, and we are doing anniversary shows for that this year and have new music on the way. And still at it, man. Still doing it. Still rocking that bass.
That's awesome. Dude, I love to see it, man. Great to reconnect with you.
Yeah, you too, Ron. Thanks for having me on, man.
That was Chris Fafalios. Really cool to catch up with him. Check him out on tour. Punchline is on tour now. Their website is punchline.com. Check out a show. You'll love it. They're fantastic live. Music for the 1000 podcast is provided by Andrew Saxena. Be sure to check out his podcast, the Bay Watching Podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. I said podcast a lot in that sentence. If you could, please leave us a 5-star review. Write a positive review. It really helps get the word out about this podcast. And if you want to support the show on the sustainability end, you can do so over at patreon.com/Ron Placone. For a Give What You Can level, you get all kinds of exclusive perks, stand-up sets not available anywhere else. You get to see my films before they're released anywhere else. And you get the bonus podcast between Andrew and myself. So that's all for a Give What You Can level. Patreon.com/Ron Placone. We're getting closer to our goal, but we could use, we definitely need some more membership here. So if you are able, even $1 a month makes a huge difference. Patreon.com/Ron Placone. All right. We are getting closer to that even 20 mark. We're getting there. Just a couple more. Closer to that 20 mark. Closer to 1,000. See you next week. Hey guys, Ron Placone here. Take your own 1,000 challenge. No, you don't need to interview 1,000 people, although if you want to do that, go for it. Your 1,000 challenge can be whatever you want. Maybe you want to call a friend out of the blue once a week. Maybe you want to read a book every month. Maybe you want to start a different garden every season. I guess that might be dependent on where you live. Look, the point of the challenge is taking on an endeavor that enriches your life in some way, and it can be measured. And then, of course, you do it regularly. That's what 1,000 is doing for me and hopefully for you too. The main reason for this podcast and every podcast I've ever done is to build community. So take your own challenge. Then join our Facebook group. It's called 1,000 What's Your Challenge? ? That's 1,000 What's Your Challenge ? And post about what your 1,000 challenge is and the progress you're making. All I ask is that people be encouraging of each other's challenges. This is personal and vulnerable, so be cool. There's enough negativity on social media. We don't need to add to it. For those of you who aren't on Facebook, hopefully in the future we'll be expanding to places like Discord, Reddit, but for now, we're starting on Facebook. And again, that Facebook group is called 1,000 What's Your Challenge? See you there.